Hello, I'm Ken Kinsley, and this is Finding the Words, the only podcast devoted to text-based art and artists. Art has a long history of spiritual seekers. Kandinsky and Hilma af Klint immediately come to mind, as does Rothko with the ethereal and contemplative non-denominational chapel devoted to his works. But in Lake Charles, Louisiana's Robbie Austin, whose work still definitely continues in that tradition of seeking, there's also an interesting element of finding, at least in terms of his materials. Specifically, finding a treasure trove of maps and field books that have become the basis for what is arguably his most fruitful creative period. Vivid abstract works that are sometimes hard-edged geometry, sometimes amorphous color field painting, but always built up on top of charts, facts, and figures dating back sometimes as far as 1890. As Robbie says in his bio, "I try and channel what the divine provides. I'm just the filter." I sat down with Robbie for a virtual chat that is easily one of the most philosophical of the series. We get into staying creative even during a break from your art, his circuitous journey that led him back to his hometown, and the importance of 80s new wave music in his life. Here's my chat with Robbie Austin. Thank you again so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Well, I was pleased that you considered me for this, even though I wasn't writing the words.
Well, that's one thing I was going to talk to you about. It is interesting. You are my first guest who doesn't put words onto images or canvas.
Right.
You put images onto words. So it's kind of the flip side of what one would generally think. How does it work for you? What is it that you are going for on that?
Yeah. Well, I didn't always use words. My background is in sculpture. I can't say I had any sort of history of text in my work. But any sculpture that I used to make, I always applied marking to it, whether it be color or paint. I'm not so much of a materialist, if you will. It was important for me in the work, to whatever structure I made, that I put another layer of language upon it in color or design. And these field books that you probably saw, these field books came to me. I acquired them 4 or 5 years ago, during as typical story that I've heard over and over again. Over quarantine, that's when they came about. The story there is actually, I think I'll share it because it's kind of interesting how these came about.
Sure.
I'm in Southwest Louisiana. It's where I was born and raised. I was educated out in Los Angeles and lived for a bit in Houston, but have been here for the past 20 years. And we had in August, quarantine hits and everything in mid-March. And then in August, we get hit by 2 Category 4 hurricanes 6 weeks apart. And it destroyed the school that I teach at. We evacuated twice. My house survived, roof damage and stuff, but it could have been a lot worse, like it was for my neighbor who lived behind me. There were lots of trees down all over the place, and it just so happens that about 2 weeks before the hurricanes came through, I was asked by the head of the local university here if I needed some nice old flat file drawers. And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? He said, we've used all we can. Just come on by and grab as many as you want. So I grabbed a couple for my classroom, a couple for my home. And while I was there and I was looking through the drawers of these files, I found some old maps. And so apparently these files at one time belonged to a survey company, a local survey company around here. And so I called the guy and asked if I could keep them. He said yes. So I have these probably, I don't know, 50 or so
Mm.
field book and maps. And I liked them so much. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I liked them so much that the first thought I had was, man, these are precious and I better be careful with them or I'm going to run out quickly, you know,
Mhm.
which is, I don't think, a very good way to start out as an artist, is recognizing or proclaiming what you're working upon is to be precious, because then it's not necessarily you who's doing you're not working freely. Fast forward a few weeks, and my tree in my yard took out a few of my neighbors' trees in their yard, and the fence in between our two homes. I see these temporary buildings she has in her backyard, and one of them is completely destroyed because my tree took it out, and then another one was not. And so I just, in talking with her,
Sure.
to each other, where the fence once was, I say, an obligatory apology, as if I could control the tree, but I'm like, hey, I'm
Right.
sorry about your building, and no, 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 no. What was in there? And she said, oh, it was a bunch of old flat files. My family was in the survey business. And so it turns out that my neighbor gave away, you know, dozens of flat file drawers that the local university went and picked up from my literal backyard, brought them back to the university. I got
S-
4 of them and brought them back home.
You could have just gone into the backyard and
Could have
just,
just gone in the back.
oh,
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
yeah. And so I tell her that. I tell her I've got these things, and she ends up being an alum of the high school that I teach at, which
Mm-hmm.
is right around the corner as well. We start talking, and so I say, hey, once all this dust settles and stuff, if you have any, there were some maps, there were some papers in there that I found that I would really like to get my hands on some more. If you have any. And she points at another building and she says, I've got hundreds of books in
Oh.
this, and I don't need them. Do you want them? So I get these field books that are, I'm going to grab one.
Okay.
They're not very large,
Mm-hmm.
and they're bound with string, so I can easily take them apart.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then each page is about 8 by 10 inches.
Mm-hmm.
So I start drawing, and they've some of them have, some of them are dated from the 1890s all the way up through to the 1980s, and they've got just markings that I don't understand. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
an engineer. I don't. I mean, like, I open it up, it's got maps on some of them. Some of them are just a bunch of numbers and stuff, but it's somebody else's handiwork and hard work from a time where these were important,
Mm-hmm.
and they're stained, and you can sometimes see the palm print of the grease of the surveyor who was out there doing it. And so I just started reacting to these. I would see it, I'd say, hey, you know what, I'm interested in this composition that's happening here. I can add a mark here, I can see how it reacts with this, and it was just a real visual play. um, but I don't like putting things behind glass. And so
Mm-hmm.
most of my three-dimensional, or the work that I would make as a sculptor would either lean up against the wall or come out of the wall. And because I liked the physicality of the objectness of things. These were not giving me that right off the bat, because it's paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I'm going to have to spend a fortune framing these, because the paper's so old. It didn't click that some of these papers were dated, 1913, and they were in good shape, and they had
Yeah.
been in a non-climate controlled storage unit. And then a friend of mine who is a geologist pointed out something to me, and he's like, he opened the book up, and right here at the
Right on the
front,
first page.
right on the first page, it says that these pages are impregnated with a resin so that they can
Wow.
resist moisture and decay. So it's like plywood. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
plastic.
Right.
They're meant to be used out in the field when it's raining, when
Yeah.
it's muddy, when it's humid. and the pencil that's on here does not erase very easily, so
Hmm.
it's in there.
Yeah, I was
So
wondering about like the ink or the pencil or any of that. Like, would that degrade before the paper?
yeah, it doesn't. In
Yeah.
fact, sometimes I'll have to. Sometimes when I'm working with inks on
Hmm.
this, which I do often, the ink will not penetrate the paper.
Oh,
So I'll have to get a very light sandpaper and take a little bit off of it so that if I want it to, so
yeah.
it'll adhere. Otherwise, I just have to let it flat and it will stay.
Hmm.
But then I started building frames for these, and so they could maintain their edge and their objectivity and stuff. Now that's the physical story as to how
Sure. Like open face frames with no
open face
glass.
frame.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. I mean, essentially, it's just me putting a frame around a canvas. Um, I mean, that's how I treat it.
Hmm.
Except that it's got that third dimension. Like I float the paper, so you have that. You can see the edge of the paper. You can see where sometimes it's worn or folded, and just hand making each frame for each piece. While I do follow a pattern, it is its own individual sculpture
Hmm.
in itself. So I'm right back where I started, back in school, where I was making objects and then applying a language of color to it. I'm just doing it with impregnated resin paper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very cool. How many of the books are left now? Because you've been doing this for almost 5 years now.
I've barely tapped into them.
Oh my
I
gosh.
mean, that's why I said at the beginning, like, that one of my first fears was I've only got 50 of these papers. I need to find, and dude, I hit the mother load with
Yeah,
these. So
you've got like
uh,
4 lifetimes worth of.
I think I will get tired of working with it before I run out of paper.
And you grew up there in Lake Charles. Then you came out here where I am to Los Angeles, Cal Arts for bachelor's, UCLA master's in sculpture, and then to Houston, and eventually back to Louisiana. How did each of those moves come about? Why Los Angeles for college? Why Houston after college?
Well, call me typical, but then again, maybe not typical because my children aren't following the same route. But I took an art class my senior year of high school because I thought it was going to be easy. It wasn't because I really had an interest
Yeah.
I mean, I had an interest. I just wasn't going to be a maker. I was gonna go into business or something.
Hmm.
And then I just fell in love. I had to declare for high school graduation. We were doing this at the time. You declared what you were going to study, and so I was sitting in art class when the yearbook person came around and said, "Hey, Robbie, I need to know what you're going to study in college." And I just said, "Undecided." And he said, "Okay." And then my art teacher said, "Wait a minute. You don't you don't want to say undecided. Like do you have any inclination to study art?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, put that down." So I did. And after my first year of studying, and I really my family was very generous to say, "Hey, he's found an interest. Don't worry about the general education courses. If you're interested in art, take a bunch of art classes to make sure that this is something that's going to stick."
Hmm.
And so I did. And at the end of the first year, I was like, "Man, this is a road I definitely want to be on." And it was really as simple as going to the grocery store one day, and this would have been in 1991. Um, U.S. News and World Report, America's Best Colleges, was right there, and so I grabbed it and looked at specialty schools, art schools, and the first two were Cal Arts and School of Visual Arts in New York City. And so I applied to a few in between, but I thought, man, if I'm going to study art, I didn't know a lot, and this was pre-internet, and so I'm like, if I'm going to study art, I want to be in Los Angeles or New York,
Hmm.
and got into both, went and visited both, and Cal Arts won.
Hmm.
And I think it was the nature of their curriculum that was so wide open. I came from a school where for 2 years I was taught how to properly paint, how to properly figure draw, how to properly do, intaglio printmaking, how to properly take a photograph. And the ideas came second. And when I went
Mm.
out to Cal Arts, it was like, what do you want to make? And what do you think the best way to make that should be?
Mhm.
And what language do you want to tell that through? And then once I came up with the idea and how I thought it could come about, working with my mentor or teachers, then they would say, okay, well, we're going to hook you up with this painter, or we're going to hook you up with this sculptor, or we're going to do. It was a complete flip, and I loved it. And then I thought about going, changing to the East Coast for graduate school, but I thought, this is why,
Yeah.
when I found something here. So
Mhm.
that's how the Los Angeles thing came around. Then I took a teaching gig back in Louisiana after graduation. Had every intention of going back to Los Angeles, and I met a girl, and
Well, there's
she,
the typical part right there.
yeah. So I returned to Louisiana, and this was 1998. So I returned to Louisiana at the same time she returned to Louisiana. I came from Los Angeles. She was coming from East Africa, actually.
Mm.
And we had actually gone to high school together. We went to the same place, but she was a little bit older than me, and our paths just didn't cross.
Mhm.
But I read a newspaper article about her, and I was like, man, if that's the same girl, this sounds interesting. If I find her, I'm going to get to know her. And so
Very cool.
we did, and we got married. And when she returned to Louisiana, she had no intention of leaving. So we compromised, and Houston has a very lively art scene and
Mhm.
museums, and so instead of going back to Los Angeles, we went to Houston and spent 4 years there.
Mhm.
We were doing quite well there. I was a stay-at-home dad and
Mm.
had a great studio, and then I had a
But
fire.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
uh,
whole studio burned
the
down.
whole studio burned down.
Now, it was not a
Um,
home studio, am I correct?
It was,
Oh.
but it was detached from the
Oh,
house.
okay.
And the crazy thing is, Ken, is that I had a gallery in Houston. She was moving locations, so she asked if her local artists could store the work that she normally would have kept in her own storage, but she was moving locations, and so myself and a few other artists that showed with her who were local took the work, and so all of my inventory, everything, which would have otherwise been with her, everything was there in the studio.
Oh,
So it was a
no.
complete clean wipeout.
Oh, wow.
And there were multiple overlaps that occurred during that time. The day before the day the studio burned down at 2:24 a.m. I remember because I heard this explosion and I sat up and I looked at the clock. We had a young child, and so I just remember vividly. So 2:24 a.m. Well, that morning prior, I had driven from Houston to Lake Charles to interview for a job at the high school that I am now teaching at. So I interviewed for the job. It went very well. On the ride home, I wasn't offered the job, but it went very well. And on the ride home, I called my wife and she asked me how it went. I said, I think it went very well, but I don't think it's the right time. You love what you're doing there, and I'm doing well. I don't think it's the right time. And so we slept on it. And then that night, my studio burned down
And created the right time.
and created the right time.
Yeah.
However, it wasn't the impetus because
Oh.
my wife was working in affordable housing, and so she worked a lot with architects and builders, and as soon as they found out that the studio had burned down, they offered to draw it up
Mhm.
for me and rebuild it
Mhm.
at cost and everything. We wanted to grow a family,
Mhm.
and all of our parents and stuff were here, and so I thought naively, well, I have a gallery. I'll just start over. We'll go to Louisiana. I'll start teaching. I'll make my
Mm.
work, and I'll just, it's 2 hours away. I'll just drive my work to Houston. All will go well. Um, well, we were successful at growing our family
Hmm.
quickly, and I had to pull out.
Yeah.
So that would have been '05, '06, '07,
Hmm.
when we grew to a family of five. And from probably '07 to 2020, I didn't really make anything. It was the
Yeah.
obligatory faculty show that I would
Hmm.
put a couple things in, but for the most part, the only work I was doing was to keep my creativity going. I started doing drawing portraits of
Hmm.
people,
Hmm.
but that's how we got
It
that.
it
That's
was
the runner.
more it was more some sort of an exercise than it was a practice.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really had no. I developed a style that I was enjoying, and looking back on it now,
Hmm.
any of the work that I was doing for the faculty exhibits was three dimensional, but this, and the portraits were not, but
Hmm.
they were on wood panels that I would put layer and layer and layers and layers of gesso upon and sand it down to where it was just really smooth, kind of like.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with religious iconography,
Hmm.
but it's the same kind of thing where it's just a good quarter inch of gesso sanded, and so I was doing that, getting really physical with the preparation, and then drawing with a lot of lines, um, more kind of rigid shading with lines
Hmm.
as opposed to, I don't know, smudging it.
Sure.
And I can definitely see how doing those portraits made me think quite a bit more about composition and capturing a personality. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, when I say that I look at the field book pages and react to them, they probably have that a personality. They
Hmm.
have their
Oh,
own
sure.
gestures going on with them that then I put something on top of.
Hmm.
So yes, it was an exercise, but it was an exercise that has definitely channeled its way through to the practice of today.
Hmm. So for like those 13 or so years, whatever it would have been, did you think of it as a break, or did you just think, well, that was that old path I was on, I'm on a new path? And did you think you were done with being an
Oh yeah,
artist? Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah. That was
Yeah.
an old path.
Yeah.
In fact, it was. I became so synonymous with teaching around here
Hmm.
that nobody knew me as an artist anymore.
Mm.
In fact, for the 10 years, I'm finishing up my 20th year of teaching right now at the high school.
Hmm.
I do the sculpture classes I teach is a local university, but for the most part, the 20 years of teaching straight through has been at St. Louis High School, and for 10 of those years, I was teaching theology. I was in
Mm.
the religion department. That's what I got hired for. I didn't get hired to teach art, and so I found the path that I was on was I was comfortable with believing that faith and art had a similar language,
Mm.
and that I was a better teacher because I had studied art and theology, and we're kind of merging the two together. I was definitely a very visual teacher. I just wasn't a maker. So I think my lectures were colorful, and I know that I was a more energized because I was finding a way to get my creativity out, not in the studio.
Mm.
But yes, to answer your question, I thought it was over.
Yeah, and there's a part of your description on your website that says you have a devoted interest in new wave music and mystical spirituality, which now makes perfect sense. Are some of the shapes and images you put on the field books and maps pulled from any particular religious tradition, or is it just?
Well, interestingly, yes, probably not as and not as intentional
Hmm.
as I would think if I'm going to say that um, from any particular tradition, except, funny you should say that.
Going over to a bookshelf to get
Um,
something here.
so, I teach in a Catholic high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I mentioned iconography, and I did a couple of retreats where I wrote icons, and I say write icons, and if you already know this stuff, I'm
Right.
sorry, but when you write an icon, a religious icon, it was because it was scripture for the illiterate, is the way it was described to me. So you're not painting something; you're working in union with the Holy Spirit to put each mark on the canvas, or I'm sorry, on the gessoed board.
Mm-hmm.
So every time you put a mark on the gesso, you're supposed to say this little mantra, which removes the self and allows the spirit to flow through. So sometimes I will get in a zone and work, and think Robbie's doing a good job today. And then things will just go awry, man. And I kind of look back. It's maybe 3 or 4 of the works of the 10 works that I thought I was in a groove with, and they're just they're just not they're just not they're just not good.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, if I say 3 out of 10, that I'm giving myself a lot of.
Well,
I
just
mean,
pretend
that
it's
was a really good day.
just pretend it's baseball,
Yeah,
and you're
that's
an
right.
all-star.
That's right. But I have some friends who would say to me how fortunate I am to be, and they're making an assumption here. But when they make this assumption, it catches my attention. And they have said, you're really fortunate to be able to spend that much time alone with yourself. And when I was doing the portraits, it was with the subject,
Mm-hmm.
okay, staring at the face of another human being, trying to bring out their light, versus doing more, abstracted work that I'm still responding to something.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found that if I'm responding to myself, that's when the least complex work comes into play.
Like some sort of feedback loop or something, or
Well, I think if, uh, yeah, I knew this was going to happen. I'm going to call it prayer instead of a
prayer.
feedback loop. I'm going to call it, um, you know, I think, you can go and you can kneel before something.
Mm-hmm.
You can prostrate yourself before something and call it prayer. You can
Mm-hmm.
sit at a table, at a meal, and say some, formality and call it prayer. But you can also just sit in silence and say, I'm open.
Mm-hmm.
And that is prayer as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's the umbrella. I think the umbrella, there was a professor of mine at UCLA, the painter Larry Pittman, and Larry said during a critique to another student whose work was incredibly good, and she has done fine for herself after graduate school. But he said to her in this critique, he's like, the only difference between your work and mine right now is the critical language that surrounds it. And I thought, wow, my first thought was, how unfair is that? Like, she's got great work,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just not out there yet to get the critical language to surround it, whether that be coming from critics or other artists or teachers or peers or whatnot. But then at the same time, I thought, how freaking refreshing
Mm-hmm.
and empowering is that? Like, if you believe in your work and you keep pushing it out there and you're true to your work, then eventually, if you stick with it, the language will
Mm-hmm.
surround it. How well you decipher and pull out the communication that you want to share, that will determine the language that surrounds it. And so to circle back, I an artist can get pretty darn full of themselves
Mm.
and believe that they are the single inspiration uh, that is creating this work. I don't believe that. I don't subscribe to that. I think that empowers the artist too much, and I think that's a lonely path. So when I enter the studio, um, am I specifically thinking about any sort of theological art? No, no.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
would I maybe choose a color because of thinking about Ash Wednesday or a Dark Night of
Mm-hmm.
the Soul or a Morning Glory or something? Yes, absolutely,
Sure.
absolutely. And what I went to go do earlier is I was thinking, I'm doing all these. Some of the work gets very structured and rigid and circular.
Mm.
And I was walking past what I thought was a Greek Orthodox church. Uh, and then I looked closer and then I thought it was a mosque. And then I looked closer and it was actually just a Jesuit church that
Mm.
had some pretty good shapes. But I picked up this book
Mm.
called Islamic
Oh.
Geometric Patterns.
Mm.
And it's a step by step just journey through making these patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always thought, since learning about, you know, whenever I was teaching theology, I was also had to do a section on world religions,
Mm-hmm.
and so Islam fell to me, and so in my very limited knowledge of it, though I do believe, and I hope I'm going to be correct on this because it's been a long time, but it's my understanding that you can't use the likeness. I mean, I know that of
Yeah.
Allah or Muhammad,
Right.
but uh, you know, and I ponder that, so you have all these beautiful patterns and designs that elevate the soul to beauty, and it's made always made sense to me that you know Ken, I'm looking at you, and we're probably around the same age, and
Mm-hmm.
we're both choose to keep our head
I,
close
yeah.
cropped.
We clearly go to the same barber. Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the same facial hair. It's gray. We're both wearing glasses. Um, any physical representation of a figure that's supposed to be one to be revered.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go with the Sistine Chapel and let's talk about God with a gray beard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you had a bad incident with a man in a white robe that was wearing a white beard, and you're supposed to look at that and be, reverent, that's going to be tough. And so
Yeah.
it makes sense to me that you wouldn't put physical characteristics to a figure that is to be revered, or it has some divinity to it, because it's dangerous, and so the patterns is something where I'm really interested in getting through like a meditative kind of uh, uh, method of drawing, really trying to remove Robbie from the equation, though
Mm.
I know that I know I'm choosing the colors, and I know I'm choosing the designs, and I know that I'm
Sure.
holding the ruler. But if I can get the more I can get Robbie out, and then come back and finish it,
Mm-hmm.
I think the more successful the work is.
And this kind of spiritual seeking, type of thing that you're talking about kind of reminds me of Hilma af Klint.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But not overtly, not like you're
No.
oh, hey, which Klimt should I do? It but her works were definitely directly spiritual, and she felt
Hmm.
like they gave some sort of answers. Do you feel like your works help you answer any questions about spirituality?
Uh, for me,
Sure.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, I don't present them, of course, as something that
Hmm.
that I desire but and that's what I meant by getting the envy that some of my peers that were not in the arts had of like, okay, your work when you're in the studio allows you to be now, whether I choose to or not, allows you to be quiet and meditative and rhythmic and just so I can fill that time with um, audiobooks on how to repair iPhones. Now, I don't know that that's going to give me much spiritual respite,
Sure.
but I choose not to do that. I tend to try and listen to, I try and tend to either silence myself or listen to things that lend themselves to putting me under that umbrella of possibly connecting with some sort of divine
Mm-hmm.
source.
And
So has it helped me? Yes. How? By, I have some friends that have a prayer room. They have their library and they have a prayer room, and they sit there. And then I don't have a prayer room per se. If everyone had to have one, then I'd say yeah, it's my studio because it allows me to be reflective.
mm-hmm. Some people have a prayer room. Some people will use Headspace. You have your
Yeah,
art studio.
sure.
So,
Some people. I used to run a lot. I found it's just getting out
mm-hmm.
there, doing something. It's just about several interviews of musicians. I
Mm-hmm.
read lots of biographies of musicians,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them surprise me because they're like, I'll sit at the piano and it'll just be crap, and I'll just be just going and going and going, and in fact, it was, I know it was Chris Martin of Coldplay and Neil Young would
Mm-hmm.
both said a very similar thing, which was, sometimes you just have to work yourself till you can't work anymore and you finally crack yourself. And then that's when it comes down. That's when it floods. And that's when you can like feel the hand kind of say, here, go with this, but you have to reach that. And to some people, it's a point of exhaustion,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. And others, maybe you're just hitting it right. But you just got to open yourself up to it.
Is hitting that point of exhaustion where you forget about you? Do you
Yeah. Oh,
think?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. You forget about. Well, no. I guess there's a story that I like where it says you can fake sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can fall asleep in bed and somebody can walk in and whether you believe that I'm sleeping or not depends on how good of how good of a faker I am. But I can fake the person that I'm trying to fool, but I can't fool myself into
Mm-hmm.
thinking that I'm asleep.
Right.
I think you can deceive yourself into thinking that you are a part of something greater and universal and spiritual. You can deceive yourself into thinking you are that
Mm-hmm.
when you're not, and you can deceive others, and that's kind of dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's a removal of self, and often you've worked as an artist,
Mm-hmm.
Ken, and sometimes you don't realize the magic has occurred until after the magic has occurred.
Oh yeah.
You don't know you're asleep until you wake up.
You got to give it a few days sometimes, a
Yeah,
few
yeah,
weeks,
right, right.
and you think this is awesome. And you come back the next day. Ooh, dang! No, that was not awesome.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
but now while you're you know in that state and while you're working, I know that music that's come up a lot, and in your bio and everything, music comes up a lot, and it's clearly important to you. Do you listen to music while you're working, or
I
is
do.
that too distract? Yeah, okay.
I do. I
Because all
do.
your title, all your works, the titles come from either lyrics or song titles. Am I
That's right.
correct? Yeah, okay. I knew it was most of them at least.
Yeah. And was that your investigation or knowledge of music that cued you in on that, or did I say that at
I
somewhere?
think you said that along the way somewhere. I think
Okay.
it might have been in an article that I was checking
Okay.
out before while I
Okay.
was getting ready for this.
Okay.
But
Well, I mean, it's true. I'd say 98%
Hmm.
of and of the titles are phrases that I've taken from song
Sure.
lyrics, and a
Hmm.
lot of them are, as you said from my website. You know, my interest in mystical spirituality and new wave music. A lot of
Hmm.
it comes from the '80s. You
Hmm.
know,
Sure.
I owned a I had a partner. I partnered with a guy, a high school friend of mine, um, for about 6 years. I was on board with him, where we had a popsicle company,
Oh,
and
cool.
it was called. He tried to get me to do it for about a year, and I just was not interested. And then one day I was mowing my lawn, and listening to Duran Duran, and the song Rio came on, and it said cherry ice cream smile. I suppose it's very nice. And I thought, cherry ice cream, that would be a good popsicle to have right now. And I thought,
Yeah.
man, if I had a banana cherry banana popsicle right now, I would call it the Durana Durana. So I immediately called him and I said, okay, dude, I'm
I'm
in
in,
if
but
all of our marketing can be '80s music. And he's like, I don't
oh,
care. Let's go for it.
that's
So the
great.
name of the company was Pops and Rockets, from the band Love and Rocket. And then, yeah, all of the
There you
title.
go.
I was in the kitchen making the recipes and naming the title. And I think that this would have been like in from 2014, 2009 to about 2014 or
Hmm.
15. During that time of non-production art production, but I was still finding ways of being creative. I kind of
Hmm.
forgot about that one. Yeah. And then I think I just held on to that interest of dissecting lyrics, because I used to make playlists all the time, man. I would like set a
Hmm.
color in mind, like, okay, this is
Hmm.
going to be my orange playlist, or this is going to be my blue silver playlist,
Hmm.
and so in listening to music, they would definitely. I don't think it's uncommon, but I would have, I would see colors when I would listen to music.
Hmm. Synesthesia? Like it really would every time you're listening to music, are you seeing?
No,
No, just you just imagine.
I just imagine
Yeah,
based on look. I'm not going to say that it's magic. It probably,
sure.
if I'd say probably 70% of it comes down to an album cover that I associate with it or something.
Sure. Sure.
But I do definitely have music that I choose to listen to during certain seasons.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. So the Cure's Disintegration.
Hmm.
That's winter and fall. You know,
Sure.
but Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is the summer album,
Hmm.
and Led Zeppelin is definitely a fall and winter band, and so Echo and the Bunnymen is completely summer.
And speaking of that, I mean, now around 2020, when you found the field books and all
Hmm.
of that happened, had you started doing art yet? Or because I
Yeah,
know that around 2020, the Psychedelic Furs released their first album, and that somehow spurred you on. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
yeah, yeah. So as it's been brought up, I'm a high school teacher, and I think a lot of the shading
Hmm.
that I would do on the portraits is similar to the what I associate with doodles on loose leaf paper, which
Hmm.
is really not around anymore in a high school. We
Hmm.
have laptops in our high school, and so and any paper that we have is copy paper. I keep on hand like stacks of loose leaf paper, because that's the epitome
Like the
of
college ruled.
yeah,
Yeah.
or it's scratching on your desk and stuff, which we they don't do anymore. We don't have wooden top desks, so it's
Hmm.
just that. So the year before COVID hit. The year before, so 2019, and I had to look. I looked this up this morning so I would have my time frame. The year before that, so 2019, I came across some large. It was 12 by 12, um, large, just sheets of blown up loose leaf paper at like an art
Hmm.
supply store.
Sure.
Okay, and I started drawing on it and doing collages on it and just drawing playground equipment, really,
Hmm.
particularly merry-go-rounds, which they don't have them anymore because they're too
Sure.
dangerous, or monkey bars, which we don't have them anymore because
Oh,
they're
like the playground merry-go-round
yeah,
ones
yeah,
that
yeah,
you
yeah,
run on
not
and
the
get
carousel, but the
thrown
playground.
off of, and yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was doing that, and then that turned into collage work on wood because I had some. I was hoping to stop doing portraits, so I started doing some collage work with paper instead of paint, and um, so for about a year, that's what I was doing. I was doing paper collages and painting on the loose leaf paper. Um, and then I got that the field books, and I think it would be remiss if I didn't mention, um, and maybe you're familiar with, but when COVID hit, there was
Hmm.
that thing on Instagram called Artist Support Pledge. Did you
Thanks.
see that?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I don't remember. Oh man, I wish I could remember who started it, but it was a guy in England.
Hmm.
And the artist support pledge was you would tag on Instagram because he had two placards, two place setting thing that you could put on there with your work. If you tagged it, used the hashtag artist support pledge, then you could price the work anywhere from I think $100 to $1,000, and every time you sold, or maybe it was 100 to, I don't remember, it was 100 to something, and every time you sold $1,000 worth of work, you pledged to buy somebody else's work through artist support pledge.
Oh,
And I was pricing these field book things at like $100. I remember there was this one lady in Tampa whose work I really liked. It was simple, it was good. And I was following her work, and she was doing this artist support pledge thing, and then I was doing it as well, and not getting many bites, and staying at home, and you know just quarantine time. And I
oh,
remember
sure,
waking up
sure.
one day, and she had messaged me to purchase one of my drawings, and that I can honestly say that we started talking. We were both fans of the psychedelic furs.
Hmm.
They announced that they were going to do that, so it just started
Sure.
rolling. You
Yeah.
know,
How would you describe your pre-2020 work?
um, I would say I would like it to have been maybe read as color field painting with a hint of drawn nostalgia or
Mm.
something.
Hmm.
Um, it was look, the paper collages that I were doing was I don't find them to be that interesting,
Hmm.
um, but they were the springboard to get me working again, and it was something that I could do. I
Hmm.
could, my kids were getting older. I had more time,
Hmm.
and I had a lot of paper, and so it was just a matter of and it dries fast. I was using a medium to put it on there. I was listening to another podcast of yours the other day, and
Hmm.
I forget who it was. I was gosh dog it, but he talked about cleaning his brushes on canvases that were getting ready to be used.
Oh, I think it was Joseph O'Neill.
It was.
Yes.
It was. And so when he said that, I thought, oh wow, that's because I would get strips of paper that were
Hmm.
that I'd tear off of a collage that I was working on. I'd say this is too good not to use. So I would then put it on another piece that was ready to get going. And so it still was reactionary.
Hmm.
I just don't think I was as Also, from a podcast that I listened to yours, Eric Stefanski,
Yes.
talking about how he was just, these aren't his words, but he was just boiling it down to the simplest form.
Yeah.
And that is when I look back at those collages that I were doing, they were very busy,
Mm.
but they had something that I could react to
Mhm.
in taking the refuse, if you will, from collages and putting it down and saying, okay, I'm gonna react to that, and I'm gonna put this color there. I'm gonna put this color, and they got too busy.
Mhm.
I know that was a lack of confidence on my part, but now it tends to be the simplest ones that react very well with, again, let's loop it back to why I'm even on this, to the text
Sure.
that's on the pages. Once you get that text color line reverberation, which I guess is music with
Sure.
lyrics,
Lyrics
uh,
and
it
melody
just,
there.
yeah, it resonates, and it
Yeah.
and it can take you somewhere, and the clearer I can lead a viewer to a place of interest without giving too many signposts,
Mhm.
uh, the more successful I think the work
Mhm.
becomes. And that is, I think, also I tend to choose the field books that have a pretty definitive language to it, literal language to them already to react to.
Mm. Okay. Because I was going to ask, like you talk about reacting. Do you go through and read what they say, or is it more just the form of where the words and numbers and charts and stuff are on the page? Are you reacting to, literally what they say?
No,
No.
no,
Okay.
no. I don't think it's literal. I try not to.
Mm-hmm.
Do I read them? Yes. I try and avoid. Well, I don't try to avoid. I avoid
Sure.
using because I have a plethora of pages. I avoid more of the numeric
Mm.
write. But if I like, I'll open this one up right now and open it up, and like I got numbers and numbers and numbers. But this one says southeast uh, proposed corner,
Mm-hmm.
like in Division Street. Like that's something that's more interesting to me than words. This map here that's
I
right
see.
right
Kind of
there,
a
and it
hand-drawn
says
little
gas
sketch.
meter and loading dock and west line and stuff, like fast line, like those things. Because I also, aside from working on these, I also work with maps, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's the journey. I guess
Sure.
it's navigating the place that like this one says August 14th, 1980, same crew, hot day. That's a
That's kind of fun.
that's yeah,
Yeah.
that's an Ed Ruscha right there.
Exactly. And you react to them and you put the stuff on there, and some of them are loaded with color and shapes and forms, and some it's like one shape that's kind of semi-opaque, and there, like, and you see, maybe sometimes you see one entire page that has nothing touched on it. When do you know when to stop? I guess that's the $1 million question.
It's the $1 million question. Um, I am a huge fan of Richard Tuttle,
Mm,
and I've never read interviews of his.
mhm,
I've read reviews of his work, what other people have to say about it, but I've never
mhm,
read his any writings that he had. And I think part of my reason for really enjoying Richard Tuttle's work is that I find that I'm assuming, and I think it's a safe assumption, that he's a highly critical, intelligent man. I know that he's written poetry. I know that he's reacted to done work pertaining to poetry. I just find much of his work to be so incredibly simple,
mm.
but just hits me in the core of emotion of just reacting to this thing. That my wife asked me the other day when I was explaining this to her, Goodness gracious, dude, you have really entered my life, because I was talking to my wife the other day about the first podcast that you did. I think it was the first one,
Yeah.
about
Okay.
the guy, the writer who
Tim
does two
Ude.
sheets of
Yeah.
paper.
The typewriter art.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just it. She was looking at it and just like, I don't. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so loaded. It's so loaded, and just like he described squeezing the book, and it just becoming one. It's so loaded that I told her the simplicity that I was yearning for was something that I don't know that I had the confidence to claim. And I was talking to her about Richard Tuttle, and she said, "Well, have you ever read any of his writings?" I said, "No." So I immediately ordered a book. I didn't even realize that there's interviews. So I got this book coming in tomorrow of Richard Tuttle interviews. Now, I'm excited to read it. It won't. I'm not going to read it as gospel, but it's going to be something that just gives me insight to, the headspace of another artist. So how do I know when it's done? When I've gone too far.
Yeah.
There's there's a phrase that I came up with when I was in graduate school, and I say I came up with it. Maybe I heard it from somebody else, but I call it the apology. And it's when I try. How do I know when it's done? When I face the fact that I'm about to deal with an apology. And what I mean by that is, if I have a work that I think is finished, and I think it's done, and it says all that it needs to, but it's so simple, but it's so beautiful, and it resonates in the way that I want it to. But there's one thing that's missing. One thing that can make it, accessible to all instead of a few. And it's, if I put that one thing on there, it's me apologizing to the viewer that I didn't have the strength, the comfort, the knowledge to let it be by itself, to let it be alone. So in a sense, I'm insulting the viewer, apologizing and insulting to them and saying, hey, you may get this, but you may not. And so therefore, I'm going to put this one last thing on there just so everybody does it. Everybody can get it. And if I can avoid those apologies, that's when I know it's done.
Robbie, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming on.
Me too.
That will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe or follow, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.